Hey guys, we're here with a 2018 H2SX, and this bike at the moment is fairly stock. It's got a Yoshimura exhaust on it and a tune, but we're going to be fitting one of our intercooler kits and our stage 4 gears and one of our fuel pumps and tuning this up on E85. This bike is actually going to go to the Salt to do some land speed racing. So yeah, I thought this would be a good opportunity to show you the fitting process of the intercooler kit and the other parts. So I'm going to get stuck straight into it and yeah, give you a look how it all goes together. We're going to start by running it up on the dyno just to see where it's at the moment. It's running a bit rough, so I think there might be a foul plug or something in it. So anyway, I'll run it up at the moment and see where the power is, and then we'll start fitting the other components. We did a couple of runs. The first run only made 175 horsepower, and I noticed that the ignition timing was still pretty much stock, and so I added a couple of degrees of ignition timing up top and it picked up, so we got a maximum of 184 horsepower. The fueling's very rich, and I haven't really looked at the fuel map, so because I'm going to do a tune on E85, what's in there now doesn't really concern me, and we're changing the pump and everything anyway, so it's all going to be different. So I'm not going to put any time into adjusting this. I'm just going to get straight into putting the new parts on. I just want to show you this. We did 3 runs, 1, 2, and this is the third run here. I'll just play this through. As you can see, the inlet temperature here, it starts getting pretty hot. As we back off there, it's getting up over 70 degrees, or up to 70 degrees. So that's not ideal, and that's the reason we put the intercooler on, to try and bring that down. It should be down around 50 or below. And in that about 65 degrees, the engine starts getting into the engine protection mode. So if you're doing back-to-back runs like highway pulls or something, it's a good chance that even your stock bike is getting into engine protection mode and you're not getting full power. So a good reason for putting an intercooler on your bike. So what I've done here is just gone around and taken all the plenum bolts out, unplugged the injectors, removed the fuel rail, the fuel hose, and the pressure nipple and the sensor connector, and of course the return hose, which we're putting a Turbosmart blow-off valve on this bike, so that'll all be gone. So now we should be able to just lift this lid and remove it. It's leaking a bit of fuel, and there we have one stock airbox. This bike is getting our full billet plenum, but we also do a intercooler that fits inside the factory plenum. You've got to drill some holes. The whole kit comes with drilling jig and everything to drill the holes, and it's a intercooler core that fits inside the standard plenum. If you don't want to go to the full billet plenum, the one with the billet plenum, the intercooler core is bigger, so the actual intercooler is more effective. It gives you about another 10 degrees Celsius decrease. So those people that want to have the maximum cooling, then that's the way to go. Alright, so let's just pull the rest of this off and get that out of there. So I've just just taken the plugs out of the bike and they're pretty dirty, so I'm going to put some new plugs in now. I just wanted to show you these different plugs here. This top one is what is in a H2SX or a ZH2, and this bottom one is what is in a H2 or an H2R. They're both the same temperature range plug. This one's a 9E9, this one's a 9B9. The only difference is that the H2 plug has a less projected tip. So the SX and the ZH2, the tip is more projected, and which is fine for a stock application. But when you start putting more boost into the motor, this H2 plug will be less prone to pre-ignition. The other thing that we've done is we've gapped this plug down to 0.45 millimeter, 18th hour, and you need to do that. The ignition system on these bikes is sort of right on the limit from factory, and when you start putting more boost and more load on the ignition system, then they really start to struggle. So you'll have, if you don't gap the plug down, you'll get breakdown issues, like the ignition system breaking down, etc. How good is this 3-footed monster, by the way? It's Australian made. Whole traction cams, magnetic, really good. They do a big one too for your big cameras. 3footedmonster.com, check them out.
And while we're here, I just wanted to show you under the tank here. So this bike's already had the air injection removed and the solenoid's been tied up, zip tied off, out of the way there. All the hoses have been taken off. You want to do away with the air injection to get your maximum performance, especially if you're tuning the bike. And the charcoal canister has also been removed, so that will also need to be done, because this area here is right where the intercooler pump sits. So it sits in there like that. As you can see, there's not a lot of space, so just having more room helps to make it easier to fit. So this one's got blanking caps being put on the cam cover barbs there, but some people put block off plates. They do the same thing. Alright, so that's what it looks like, and now we'll start to install the plenum. One other thing that I forgot to mention is also the return hose for the stock blow-off valve, which comes around and goes onto the back of the airbox down the back here. I'm actually putting a different air filter in this airbox, so we're going to be pulling the airbox out anyway to access it, so we can take that off once we do that. The hose clamp in there is you've got to access it from the other side anyway, so we'll take the airbox off and remove that hose and put the blanking cap. I just wanted to show you the position of it. It's right there behind the bottom fuel rail. So this is the complete kit for the SX, the intercooler, and then we've got our fuel pump and gears and things over here, blow-off valve, that's the heat exchanger, that's the water pump, this is the plenum. So it's got the intercooler core inside. We often get asked about what that plate is in front of the intercooler core. It's a diffuser plate, because the air coming out of the supercharger is directed in this one spot. It helps to disperse the air through the intercooler core and makes it work more effectively. Also new for 2024, we have our velocity stacks. These fit in here and just help with a bit of high-end performance. We also now include a ball end Allen key to install the bolts for those. This is our header tank overflow hose, a tool for tightening all the AN fittings, blow-off valve block off for the original port on the airbox, which you'll see in a minute. We leave this fitting disconnected because it's tricky to fit it into the bike with it on, so you're better off doing it without it and then fitting it later. We've got some sealant and some Loctite. So the intercooler core has mounting brackets that fit around the original radiator, and a patch harness to tap in the water pump to the headlight circuit on the bike. Because this is an SX, the original hose won't work on the connection between the supercharger and the inlet of the plenum, because this hose is too long and it's got a bend in it, so we supply a little straight section of hose.
On this bike we're also using, because we're using stage 4 gears on this one, we are going, and we're putting on E85 fuel. We've got our 1000cc upper injectors and fuel rail, and then obviously our upgraded fuel pump assembly. Okay, so this is the airbox off the bike, and we've got our included blanking cap that just fits onto the spigot on the back there, and then the little hose clamp that is included also just holds that silicon cap in place. Something else that we worth noting is that on these bikes, some people have mentioned that the 3 mounting bolts haven't been Loctited from factory, and there's been reports of bolts coming out and falling into the impeller of the Supercharger and damaging the impeller. So these bolts were actually Loctited, and we're going to put some fresh Loctite on them when we put it back together. Just something worth noting. Another thing that we need to do is the fuel rail. This center section of the fuel rail needs to be rotated down one flat section of this, so that these center hoses will rotate down slightly. So that means removing the 4 mounting bolts, and you can actually, there's O-rings in here, so that you can pull it apart and then rotate it down. While we've got it apart, I might actually put the Supercharger gears in, because it's easier to access the Supercharger chain tensioner while the fuel rail's off. So these can come apart, and then we're rotating it down one flat section, so that whole thing is tucked down like that, and this just gives enough room for the intercooler to the intercooler has a section that comes down here, so it just clears the fuel rail. I'm not going to install that because I'm going to actually take it out again and pull that tensioner out for the Supercharger chain. So I've put the bike on the side stand, because when you take the clutch cover off, if you don't lean it over to the left hand side, the oil will run out the bottom of the case here, because this is the oil level in the motor. So if you lean it over, the oil goes to the other side of the motor. I've got to start by taking off this overflow tank, and then I'll remove the clutch cover to access the clutch, and then we've got to remove everything inside there to get to the Supercharger gears, and then obviously we'll take the cover off here and the tensioner out. So we've taken the clutch cover off and the clutch out, and these are the 2 gears here that we need to access. We need to remove the bolts out of here, and this tensioner, as you can see, without that upper fuel rail in there, then it's easier to access these tensioner bolts. These are Loctited, and they can be a bit hard to get out. I'm going to use a rattle gun, but if I struggle with especially the bottom one, I might end up putting a bit of heat on the end of the bolt there before I rattle gun it out. Another thing worth mentioning is that take note of how this tensioner in this chain it's tight when it's installed correctly, and the tension is in correctly. There should be no slack in this chain. So when you reassemble it, if you get any slack in this upper chain
from this, with the tensioner pushing down on it. If there's any slack in it, then you haven't got the tensioner released correctly. That one came out quite easily. As you can see, that's got some red Loctite on it. We'll put some fresh stuff on, and you've got to make sure you clean the threads as well in the shafts. So sometimes there's oil in there, and it's worth giving them a clean before you put the bolts back in. Otherwise, the Loctite really won't do anything. And that one came out quite easily as well. And that one's got the blue Loctite. I will take that tensioner out. You can access these without with the fuel rail in place. It's just easier with the fuel rail out. A good selection of tools. Yeah, it definitely makes life easier. So this now is in the released position, and before we reinstall it, we have to push that back in. It's quite hard, but I'll show you in a minute how you push that back in and you lock this clip back in place. So we've got to take this lower guide off to, there's a lip on it, so it grabs the chain, or just loosen it like that, so that we can get that chain up over it, and then we'll be able to get that top gear out. Like that. Take our chain out, and the lower gear. The inside of that shaft is actually quite dry. I'll just get a little brush and clean out the Loctite out the end of it, and the same with the upper one. It's quite dry in there. On the H2s, they feed the oil to these gears through the shaft, so the actual shaft gets filled with oil. But on the SX and the ZH2, they don't do it that way. It's just splash fed within the gear case. These are the OEM gears at the top, and then the ones we're replacing at the bottom. So our drive gear is going from a 22 to a 24 tooth, and then our driven gear, which is the top gear, is going from a 25 tooth to a 23 tooth, swapping it so that it overdrives the supercharger. This is a SX specific gear, but this gear works the same. It's just it just means the washer sits out 1 millimeter more. It still clears the clutch and everything. Now we can raise that bottom guide back up. Put a spacer in here, so just be careful not to, like a steel collar, you've got to be careful not to drop it down into the motor. With the stage 4 gearing, the chain will be a bit tighter just because of the nature of how it sits, and so there's a bit of a trick to getting your tensioner to push in properly. I'll show you that. Some fresh blue Loctite on that bottom one. And red Loctite on the top one. Now to reset this, this needs to turn and push in. So you sort of turn it on your hand and push until the oil squeezes out of it. You have to rotate this to, I push it against my hand and push in, and it squeezes all the oil out that's inside here. And you've got to get to a point where this little wire locks into that groove. Now that will hold its position until you put it back in the bike, and when you press the top
tensioner, the top guide arm up, it'll push against this, and this clip will release, and then it'll put tension on it. Be sure to put the gasket back on the tensioner, and then get the orientation around the right way, and that'll just drop back in. So as you can see, this top chain, I think you can see, I'll put a bit of light in there, it's quite loose in there. So what we need to do is push up, and now it's released against the tensioner is actually pushed down against the arm up the top here. Now that still has a bit of movement. Now this tensioner has notches that it locks into, and because this chain works out a little bit tighter with the 24 tooth gear down the bottom here, it's not actually locking into that first position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen the two tensioner bolts slightly with the expanded, and hopefully it should just go into the first notch on the tensioner, and then I can tighten them back down and it should be tight. You'll see what I mean. So what I've done is I've released that until there's about, I don't know, 3mm gap under the tensioner itself. And now I'll tighten it back down. So now that it's back down, and you can see that it's caught that first notch on the tensioner, and that chain is tight. So that's how it should be. If there's any movement in that upper arm, in the tension in this arm, or in any slop in that chain, then it's not right, and the chain will make a slapping noise when you start the bike, and it won't grab the first notch on the tensioner, and it'll always make noise. It really only happens with the 24 tooth, like the stage 4, because of the size of this bottom gear. It just makes the whole chain a little bit tighter. Now we can put the clutch back in. There's 2 drive pins for the oil pump that need to line up exactly. If you don't get those lined up, the clutch won't be in properly. Face that vertically so I can try and get this positioned correctly. There we go. I felt that go onto the pins, so that kind of centers the clutch basket, and I can feel that it's locked into those pins. So then I put the bearing in, and that inner spacer, and then it has a washer, and then we can put the inner hub back in. I'm not going to be able to put this in as an assembly. I'll have to put the hub in and then put the plates in separately. Springs. We'll put this outer spacer on. It's got to line up with the spline, like that. Now we can tighten the nut. 130 Newton meters, 96 foot-pounds is about 4 ugger-duggers. You've got to hold that in, make sure that these are in position, hold it in so you can refit the springs. Just tighten them evenly. Now we can put our covers back on, and we'll start on fitting the intercooler. We're going to fit these mounting brackets for the front heat exchanger. They aren't symmetrical, so it goes up higher on one side, so they are directional. So this is the left hand side one, which is what we want, and I just remove the upper fan mounting bolt and pull this foam away from the end tank a bit, and that fits up in underneath the mount, and then the foam will just go back over it. And I might even put a bit of fresh double-sided tape on that so it holds it back in position, and the same on the other side. So now we can fit the heat exchanger into the front. I've already put a bit of our thread sealant onto the actual threads of it, and then you can fit the bolts onto the bracket. Again, these are slotted, so you can push the heat exchanger in tight against the radiator like that. Just hold it in tight while you tighten them up. Get the maximum clearance to the tyre. These brake lines in here need to be zip tied together to make sure that under compression that they don't flex and hit the heat exchanger. So we'll put a zip tie on them as well. While we're here, we can fit the left hand radiator hose. It just passes through the frame. It goes up through the frame and then down onto the fitting here. And then it feeds up around through the frame to the back of the plenum, and then same around on the right hand side. Feed the hose through. It goes up to the reservoir and then down onto the fitting on this side. So these fittings are a tapered AN fitting. If you've never used them before, they can swivel until they're tight. Once they're tight, they don't swivel. So if yours has still got movement in it, you haven't got it tight enough. It hasn't seated on the tapered section of it. You can get them surprisingly tight. And now we'll fit the water pump. So now putting the water pump in, I've already fitted this upper hose, and I'll feed it through, and I'm going to attach the lower hose just before I fit the pump. It's just a bit easier. You get a bit more manoeuvrability with the pump loose to get the angle right to get the fitting on. I've already applied the thread sealant to those threads. Get them nice and tight, and I'll just route this up here for now. The wiring goes up the center frame support to the connection at the front. And now we can screw our mounting bracket in place.
Put that on the wrong way, didn't I? And now we need to route this hose down through next to the frame and go under this wiring here. And the reason, it's a bit hard to see, but the reason we leave the fitting off the end of this is because there's not much gap between the frame and the TPS, or the throttle body unit there, and you can't get a fitting through there, but you can get the hose through. It's just a tight squeeze. A bit of effort to work it through, and now that hose is in the right spot, and we can actually now fit the hose end to that hose. Just make sure that's tight. Yeah, it's much easier to fit all this before the plenum is in place. I've already fitted this fitting to the plenum. Obviously used our sealants again, and I've applied we supply some silicone grease. I put a bit of silicone grease on that fitting so that when we force that in there, it just slides in easy, and these grip, it's a self-locking, so they'll grip in place. I'm not going to put it in just yet because I want to show you what we've got to do. At the back corner here, the ABS hoses on this model foul on the back corner of the plenum, and so it's a hard steel line that just needs to be bent back out of the way slightly. So I'll probably use a soft hammer and just bend it slightly out of the way. Like that. This is just a hide hammer. Rubber hammer would do, rubber mallet would do. And now that should go down into position without any fouling. So having this fitting on the plenum, it allows you to push it in to the hose a bit easier. Just pull that hose up a bit, because you've got something to push against. Just make sure you get that silicone lubricant into the hose. So that's locked into the hose fitting, and we can put our plenum down in place, making sure there's nothing caught underneath it, and obviously make sure that your O-rings are all still in place. So now we can start bolting down the plenum using the original mounting bolts. These are only going to go into the positions where our velocity stacks aren't. So the velocity stacks go like that. So the two front ones and the center rear one of each will be using new bolts. So, and obviously just put fresh Loctite. I've put some fresh Loctite on these bolts. I'll go around and retorque them, just getting them in there. As the two center ones that don't have bolts going through the velocity stacks, but they're hard to access because of the intercooler core. So we've supplied two short socket heads that you can use the included ball end Allen key to install them. Just much easier than trying to use a socket on them. Again, we put Loctite on those, and they just fit down in there. The original copper washers get used on these. Okay, now we need to fit our spacers and our copper washers to the where the velocity stacks fit. Copper washer on each, and then the rear one has a 10mm spacer as well. And then our bolts go in there. Each bolt has a steel washer on it as well for the top side. That's a short one. They don't need to be super tight, just firm. Again, copper washer first, and then our spacer on the back one. The reason we put a spacer there, I know it's an extra piece, but it was too difficult to get the velocity stack in with a tall spigot as part of it, so we've made it as a separate spacer, just purely for installation. We need to use our ball end Allen key again. Because these threads have had Loctite in them before, some of them are a bit tight to get the threads through. On the left hand side, I've already fitted the hose here. You have to get up in behind the frame here to tighten the fitting. But it's actually easier to fit that hose to the plenum base before bolting down the plenum base itself. You can fit it, like start to screw it on above here, and then you can just do the final tighten once it's in place. It's a bit tricky to see, but yeah, that's on the fitting there, and that's tight. We've got our two plenum lids here, and normally you would transfer the whole plenum and fuel rail and injectors from the OEM over to the new one. In this case, we're using the 1000cc upper injectors and the fuel rail, so I've just put those in instead with their little patch adapters. The only thing that we've transferred across from the original plenum is the pressure sensor, temperature sensor, and the little hose tail there. So now we can fit the lid, and then we'll fit the blow off valve. So now we can put our lid in position. I've put the new silicone adapter hose on there. We've reused the OEM clamps. I'll put it on there first, and then bring this down into it. It's an easier way, like that. And then we can go and fit all of our bolts. And check that they're all firm. That one's not. You don't have to be torqued them to spec. They're about 10 Newton meters is what an M6 generally goes to, and that's just firm basically. These hose fittings don't need to be super tight. It's pretty much held by the all the bolts holding it down, and so as long as they're clamped on so they can't leak like that. Next thing we fit is the blow-off valve. We've got the gasket there and the two new mounting bolts. If you find that the reservoir is in the way, you can just loosen that and flex it down out of the way. The bracket's got a bit of movement and a bit of flex, so you can always bend the pump, you know, out of the way once you've got this in position. We'll put our signal hose back on like that. Now I can tighten the water pump. Like I said, it's got a bit of flex in that bracket, so you can just push it so it's out of the way of the blow-off valve, and you can easily access the cap to fill it up. Reconnect our injectors and our 2PS once again, and then the fuel line can come around. I should have put that on first. Now we need to put our overflow hose down to our header tank on the bike. So our header tank hose can just route up through the convenient way up to the tank itself, and then comes down and connects into the radiator overflow and to the actual header tank. I might actually change the way that that is connected. That can come up there, and we can actually just shorten that slightly. I'll shorten that hose. That's basically what we're doing. Now we can fill it with some coolant. I'm using the same coolant that's in the bike. I'll put a bit of coolant in the reservoir first, so that reservoir is full. And now what you need to do is turn the key on and just crank it so the headlight comes on, so you can hear the pump running, and it's got, so that's got an airlock in it. You might hear it making a funny noise, a squeal. So what I'm going to do is just give it a bit of a shake, see if I can get some air out of the system, and if that doesn't work, then the easiest thing to do is to blow into the reservoir to try and force the coolant through the system. And I just blocked off that with my finger, and it sucked the airlock through. I might need to do it again. And once it's full, you'll be able to tell, because you'll see the coolant moving in the reservoir. It's not moving at the moment. Some short, sharp bursts of pressure, and it's pumping. I can see it pumping now. And that'll just push all the air out of the system. Just leave that for a minute, and it'll slowly work all the air out. You can see the coolant moving around in the pump, getting pumped through there. Whee! Not that much more. Alright, I'm pretty satisfied that that's got all the air out, so I can turn that off now. The cap back on,
I'll check this again once we've run the bike. I'll check that it is to see if it's gone down at all. Intercooler kit is fully installed now. The next thing on this bike is that I'll be putting a fuel pump in the tank, so I'll go and do that now. Now we can fit the fuel pump to the tank. So the first thing we need to do is remove the OEM pump. And then the replacement pump just slots straight in. It's a little bit tighter to get in, so just be careful. But it slots straight into the same position and can be altered back in position. Gasket, everything remains the same. This pump's got a pressure signal that connects to the plenum, which is this hose, this fitting. So we'll put the hose on there now, so that when we fit it to the bike, we can just plumb the hose straight to the plenum. Looking at the data from the last few dyno runs that we did, you can see that the inlet temperature is much lower now than with the without the intercooler. I'll just play this one through, and as you can see, it actually I'll just drag this through. As you can see, we do our dyno run and our inlet temperature is getting up to now 47, 48. Gets up to 50, 52 degrees before it starts dropping back down. And it also recovers much faster than without the intercooler. Alright, well, we ended up with a best of 282 horsepower, up from 184 when it first came in. It was tuned originally to run out to 13,000 RPM. We've cut that back to about 12.5. It starts nosing over about 12,000 anyway. So, but that's plenty of power for what the bike's going to be used for. That's on E85, and we've done a pump fuel tune as well. So the low power mode will be pump fuel, and that makes about 240 horsepower. This graph, you can see that the torque, this is the torque down here. And we've gone from about 98 foot-pounds up to about 138, I'd say. So that's a decent increase. The torque is moved up a little bit further as well. Peak torque is around that 10,000 revs. You can also see that the boost has gone up from about 18 pounds at the peak to around 24, and that's with the stage 4 gears. Alright, thanks for watching guys, and we'll see you next time.